who loves with boundaries, who leads with clarity, and who never forgets. The people who are closest to you will always carry the greatest power to hurt you, which is why your greatest power must be knowing exactly who and what is worth the risk. Trust feels simple when you're young. You give it without hesitation, assuming that if your intentions are good, theirs must be too. You share, you open up, you believe. And for a while, that innocence feels like strength. It creates bonds, it builds warmth, it makes the world feel safe, but safety built on assumption is fragile. Eventually, life teaches you that trust is not a gift you hand out freely. It's a currency, one of the rarest, and every time it's spent in the wrong place, it costs you more than you thought it would. That's the lesson most people learn too late. That trust, once given freely, becomes a calculated risk. The higher you climb in life, emotionally, professionally, spiritually, the more that risk increases because now your decisions carry weight. Your words echo further. Your vulnerabilities, once harmless, now become tools in someone else's hands if they choose to misuse them. And while it doesn't mean you stop trusting, it means you start choosing carefully, not with fear, but with awareness, not from paranoia, but from pattern recognition. You begin to understand that trust isn't something you owe anyone. It's something they earn slowly, consistently, and not just once but over time, through action. There's a kind of grief in that realization because it means letting go of the idea that you can fully relax in every room, that you can be fully seen by every person who claims to care. It means that even the people closest to you have limits and that proximity doesn't equal loyalty. That truth stings at first, but it also sharpens you. You stop mistaking charisma for character. You stop equating shared history with shared intention. And most importantly, you stop confusing kindness with alignment. To be powerful is to be deliberate, not defensive, not closed off, just intentional. You understand that trust isn't just about what someone says, it's about what they do when it's inconvenient for them, when no one is watching, when they have nothing to gain. That's the test most people fail, not because they're evil, but because they haven't done the work to hold someone else's trust with care. And trust when placed in unsteady hands doesn't just break, it backfires. This is why the wise grow quieter, why they speak less, share less, move more in silence. Not because they've lost faith in people, but because they've found peace in being selective. They've learned that some people want your trust not to honor it, but to access you, to use it as leverage, as proof of closeness they haven't really earned. And when you've been burned enough times, you stop letting words convince you. You start looking for consistency, and not just in how someone treats you, but in how they treat people who can do nothing for them. Aristotle once said, "We are what we repeatedly do." And in the realm of trust, that means you pay attention not to grand gestures, but to repeated behavior, to how someone shows up when you're silent, to how they speak about others behind closed doors, to whether they protect what you share when you're not in the room. Trust then becomes less about the stories people tell and more about the patterns they reveal. This shift changes your relationships. It doesn't make them colder, it makes them clearer. You no longer feel the need to be fully understood by everyone. You stop offering your inner world like a gift to anyone who asks. You start holding it with reverence because you realize that the more sacred something is, the fewer hands it belongs in. And your thoughts, your doubts, your dreams, those are sacred, not because they're perfect, but because they're yours. There's a kind of strength that comes from keeping certain things for yourself. Not out of secrecy, but out of self-respect. You realize that not every insight needs to be spoken, not every plan needs to be shared, and not every feeling needs to be validated. The powerful don't hide. They refine. They withhold, not out of fear, but out of discipline. They know that once trust leaves your hands, It belongs to someone else, and not everyone is worthy of that responsibility. But this doesn't mean you become cynical. It means you become calibrated. You still love, but you love wisely. You still connect, but with boundaries. You still open up, but only to those who have shown that they know how to carry what you hand them. And even then, you watch, not with suspicion, but with awareness. Because trust, when given too quickly, turns into a liability. But when given with discernment, it becomes a bridge that strengthens both sides. Carl Jung believed that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. And transformation requires integrity. It requires presence. It requires the willingness to hold another person's truth without twisting it, leaking it, or using it as a mirror for your own insecurities. Most people aren't ready for that kind of responsibility, and that's okay. But once you see that clearly, you stop expecting it. And in that release, you reclaim your power. You begin to notice the spaces where your trust has been stretched too thin, where you've over-explained yourself, overexposed yourself, where you've given people access to places within you that they hadn't earned, and slowly you begin to seal those doors. Not with anger, but with grace. Because you're not punishing anyone, you're protecting what matters. Your focus, your peace, your vision. And what's beautiful is that the more selective you become, the more honest your life becomes. The relationships that remain are stronger, the conversations are deeper, the silence is richer. You don't need to perform, you don't need to convince, you just exist fully without defense, because you've learned to trust yourself first. And that's the trust that matters most. Once you hold that, everything else becomes easier to navigate. The world doesn't need more open books. It needs more wise authors. People who know which pages to share and which ones to keep close. People who understand that trust is not a transaction. It's a bond. And bonds, when formed without care, become chains. But when formed with intention, they become anchors. So yes, trust is a risk always. But now it's a risk you measure. A gift you protect, a language you speak with precision, not impulse. And in that precision you find something the reckless never will. Peace. Peace in knowing that what's shared is respected, what's held is safe, and what's built is solid. You don't have to be suspicious of everyone. Just awake, just grounded enough to see clearly, to trust wisely, and to never again hand over your power. Are disguised as vulnerability to someone who hasn't proven they know what to do with it. That's not caution, that's wisdom. And wisdom is the currency of the truly powerful. Clarity isn't something you stumble into, it's something you make room for. And more often than not, that room begins with distance. Not emotional detachment in the cold, indifferent sense, but distance in the way a painter steps back to see the whole canvas. You can't understand a situation while you're still wrapped in its emotion. You can't make sharp decisions when your vision is fogged by closeness, comfort, urgency. That's why the ones who lead well, think well, and live well are often misunderstood as distant. But distance isn't rejection, it's reflection. There's a quiet kind of power in learning how to step back, to not jump at every emotion, to not react to every tone in someone's voice or every shift in someone's behavior. When you're close to everything, too close, you become reactive. You start seeing threats where there are none. You start projecting fears instead of identifying facts. And that's how chaos enters. Not because the world got louder, but because your inner world stopped filtering the noise. The Stoic knew this. They didn't talk about control as domination. They spoke of it as inner command. Seneca wrote, "He who is brave is free, but bravery isn't charging in." Bravery is knowing when to hold back. Holding back is harder than acting. It requires more strength to pause than to speak, more clarity to observe than to intervene. But this is the foundation of real power, not performance, but precision. When you operate from clarity, you don't need to control others. You control the one thing that truly matters yourself. And when you can do that, your environment stops becoming a battlefield and becomes a space for strategic movement. You start to respond instead of react. You move with timing. Instead of impulse, you see patterns instead of just people. That shift change everything. Suddenly, you're no longer sucked into every conflict, every invitation to drama, every emotional wave. You recognize that peace isn't found by avoiding problem, but by standing still within them. Distance gives you that stillness. It's the space between emotion and action where your real power grows. Because once you've paused, once you've breathed, once you've removed yourself from the immediate pressure, you can actually see not just what's happening, but why it's happening. And more important, how to move through it without losing yourself. Clarity isn't always comfortable. It will ask you to acknowledge things you'd rather avoid. It will reveal truth about people you care about, decisions you've made, and patterns you've repeated. But without that clarity, you're just surviving. And survival without insight becomes a loop. A cycle of reaction, regret, reset distance breaks that cycle. It slows you down just enough to notice the choice before the mistake. That's the kind of control most people never reach.